Hey, good morning, guys. So I thought I'd bring you up to speed on where we're at. A lot of the projects that I started working on so far are still underway because I've hit the point with each where I've had a stopping point. So I'll bring you up to speed here real quick and tell you where we're at and what we're planning on next. I have got one of the dock carts sitting out the front of the boat. I've got a whole bunch of cardboard and wood stuff, junk that I've pulled off the boat. There was the two kind of cheesy side-mounted, wall-mounted lamps. I took those down. They weren't actually wired in, hardwired. What they had done is kind of run the wiring onto the carpet and then just plugged it into an outlet. So those were just essentially lamps. So I took those out. I'll start to really get serious about planning out my lighting refit here, because here in the galley, this light right here is going to get replaced. There's these little lights under the cabinet, and they are plugged into the wall. They're a small little mini fluorescent kind of thing, and they get really hot, and I think they look really crappy. So there's also one above the sink that doesn't work. There's a lot of lights on this boat that don't work. So I've counted up all of these dome lights. I don't know if you can see it behind me, but these mounted dome lights, some of those, I can replace all of those with an LED version, and you can get either the straight white ones for just general lighting, or you can get the ones that you can flip between red and white for red for your night vision. So I've counted up all of those. I've found them on the internet. I'll be ordering some of those to replace those, because those go in a white kind of recessed fitting, and you know, it'd be difficult to do something different there without it looking wonky, I think. So I'll just replace those with newer LED versions of those lights. And yeah, that brings me to the galley sink here. So I'm going to spin you around and show you what we're up against here, and see if we can figure out how we're going to get this project rolling. Okay guys, well, pay no attention to the dishes that the dishwasher didn't put away last night after he did the dishes, but this is our galley sink. We got an issue here. This was never hooked down tightly, and it's very stiff to turn the sink, so you're constantly battling with that thing. You have to kind of hold the base while you're turning it. So that was never installed properly to begin with. So we're going to fix that, and I believe that we'll probably be able to use this hole for our little spigot, faucet, whatever you want to call it here so this is our water treatment system. So what we're going to do is this unit right here is going to go on the back wall behind, you know, on the bulkhead back there behind the sink, and then this will go one side or the other up there. Hopefully there'll be room for it height wise between here and here. I haven't measured yet, so I don't know about that. We might, I'm hopeful if worst case we can maybe trim that down and shrink it down a little bit, but we'll get to that when we get to that. And before we can start on that, we got to A, obviously put the dishes away, but B, if we come down here to the cabinet underneath this thing, we got to clean all that stuff out of there and make room to work. So it's not going to be a waltz here. It's going to be it's a little confined space-wise, but there's nothing for it but just to tear into it. So hopefully I have what I need to get this project rolling, although I'm expecting to need some plumbing fittings, maybe a converter to go from the copper to the PEX or whatever, but I won't know that until I'm kind of into it. So I'll get into it and then I'll know what I got. I might even wind up lifting the sink out, although it looks like maybe it's underneath this side wall over here. So yeah, this might get nasty before it gets done, but you know me, if we can't do a job and make it more complicated than it needs to be, we don't get any fun out of it. So let's tear in.
All right, well, just have a look at all the cleaning supplies that were underneath this kitchen sink, or the galley sink here. Now, I got to tell you, I have no idea what I even do with most of those. But this is the cabinet area underneath the sink. There was a shelf in here. I pulled that out, but it looks like there's going to be plenty of room to get our installation done. So I did unbox the AccuView water purifier, and I'm not sure I am going to be able to cut down that spigot thing. And it will not fit between the counter and that back cupboard. So might have a little bit of an issue with that. Not sure what I'm going to do about that just yet. But other than that, it does look like they include pretty much everything you need in the box with this thing. There's a mounting bracket for that pre-filter, and kind of a bar that you screw to the wall that you hook the actual UV unit to. So it looks like a pretty well thought out kit with pretty much everything you need in it. All right, well, since I can't really get the AccuView fully installed right now, I thought while I was ripping stuff out and getting ready to make a run to the dumpster, I'd get rid of some of these lights. Now, this is the light that was over the kitchen sink, or the galley sink. Did not work at all. I don't know if just the bulb was burned out, but a lot of these are, like I said, they're these small little, they look like kind of like a fluorescent tube in them, and they do generate a lot of heat. So I got rid of that one above the galley sink, took the little clock down here. As it turns out, the clock was hanging from a thumbtack, so that was less than optimal installation on that thing. And then there was a couple of little chrome loops screwed to the top of the wall up there, or the top of the overhang of the counter, that I'm not really sure what they were. So I took them down, got them out of the way. If I figure out that there was a great need for them, I haven't thrown them away, so we could put them back. So underneath the rest of the counters, there was about 4 of these little, they're about 6 inches long, these little fixtures. And it looks like the light bulb in there is kind of set to tilt, so you could kind of aim it a little bit. They were mostly just pointing straight down. But I grabbed one of these after it had been turned on for a while, and it was really generating quite a bit of heat. So these are all coming out and will be replaced with one LED strip across the whole countertop that will, kind of bathe the whole thing in light, as opposed to 4 little units there. There were 3 across the edge I'm working on right now, and 1 kind of in the picture to my right there underneath the other cabinet after it turned the corner there going over towards the stove. Well, remember how at one point in time I told you, I don't know if I told you, I think I did, that I started up the engines. You know, the previous owner had the fuel filters replaced right before I took ownership. And he said, hey, you know, the guy that replaced the fuel filter said, start both engines when you get them in it and run them up to temp. And that will just make sure that, you know, if there's any air bubbles in the fuel system, they'll get worked out and so forth. Well, I did that. And when I first lit them up, I had a little momentary panic attack there because the port side oil pressure gauge was reading 0 while the engine was running. Now, the oil pressure alarm had gone out after I started it. So I wasn't 100% worried that I really didn't have any oil pressure. I did go down and pull the dipstick and check for leaks and all that kind of thing, make sure I had oil in the block. But I was really suspecting that I had a bad gauge. So since I have two identical gauges, one for the port engine, one for the starboard engine, I decided that the logical troubleshooting step would be to switch the gauges and plug the questionable one in on the spot where we knew we had a good one over on the starboard control set, and vice versa. So I did that, took some pictures of the back of the gauge as I was taking it apart so I could tell where all the wires went and so forth. And sure enough, it's a dead gauge. So the working gauge on the starboard side, when you first turn a key on, it kind of moves a little bit, like it kind of comes up to 0 from slightly below 0. And the gauge on the port side engine, when you turn a key on, never even wiggled. So that was my first indication that, yeah, this is just a dead gauge. I moved it, and sure enough, when I plugged it in over on the starboard side, started the starboard engine up, there was no oil pressure showing over there. And so, you know, that clinched it, that it, in fact, was just the gauge. Now, I reached out to customer support at Perkins. These are Perkins diesel engines, and gave them the gauge number that was on the face of the gauge. And they replied back to me and said, yeah, that's a old gauge you have there, and it's no longer made, but if you can find us your serial numbers off your blocks, that'll tell us the year they were built and so forth, and we'll get you a part number for replacement. So I went down in the engine compartment and climbed all around looking where they told me to look for block numbers, and didn't really find anything that matched the serial numbers they told me to expect down there. I did find a couple of cast numbers on the block, but I think it was more like on the exhaust manifold and the water pump and so forth. So I took a lot of pictures of what I had down there, and I've sent all that off to them, and hopefully they'll be able to get back to me and go, okay, well, even without the serial numbers, we can tell you this about your engines, what gauge number you need. So I hope to get that sorted out. While I had this apart, at one point I had knocked one of the wires off the starter switch on the port side engine without realizing it, and so put everything back together, and then I had no starter on the thing, and that freaked me out for a little bit until I finally figured out, oh, I just had the whole dash apart. I wonder if I just knocked a wire off. So sure enough, I just knocked a wire off. So this is a little stressful, you know, dealing with the engines and oil pressure, you know, it's a big deal. But I got it all back together, got everything working just fine. The interesting thing is, after a while of running the starboard engine with the bad gauge over there, all of a sudden the gauge popped up and showed oil pressure. And then I shut the engine off and tried it again, and it never came back again. So it would register oil pressure at some point, you know, it wasn't totally dead, or I mean, whatever's shorted in there or broken at some point would kind of come back to life for a second. But we'll get those swapped out and put my mind at ease that I can monitor oil pressure at all times.